My name is Lucas Montgomery, and I am 27 years old. If you had told the me of a decade ago that I would one day be the sole inheritor of my grandfather's entire estate, a sum that would be valued at a jaw-dropping $3.5 million, I would have probably laughed myself sick. Back then, my biggest concern was figuring out if I'd have enough gas money to last the week, let alone find myself seated in a polished lawyer's office with my estranged parents staring at me with the hungry eyes of vultures circling their next meal. The deep, biting irony is that these were the very same parents who had ceremoniously cast me out on my 18th birthday, sending me into the world with nothing more than a worn-out backpack and the declaration that I was no longer their burden to bear. Yet there we were, them materializing at the reading of the will as though the intervening 10 years of silence and neglect had simply been a brief, forgettable intermission. Growing up, my family life was a complex tapestry of appearances. My parents were far from destitute. We occupied a comfortable 2-story house in a manicured suburban neighborhood. My father held a respectable position as a regional manager for a major logistics firm, while my mother worked as a part-time teacher who carried herself as if she were the unelected queen of the local parent-teacher association. But beneath this veneer of success, they harbored a catastrophic flaw. For them, the perception of perfection was everything. My older sister, Sophia, was the living embodiment of their ideal. She was the golden child, a straight-A student, a popular cheerleader who never gave them a moment of trouble. In their eyes, she could do no wrong. I, on the other hand, was cast in the role of the perpetual disappointment. I wasn't a rebel in the traditional sense. I didn't break rules or cause scenes. I simply failed to fit into the rigid mold they had prepared for me. I was drawn to art over athletics, to literature over mechanics, and I possessed a stubborn curiosity that led me to question the very traditions they expected me to blindly accept. In their world, this was an unforgivable transgression. As I entered my teenage years, the cracks in our family facade widened into gaping chasms. Money, in particular, became their preferred weapon. For Sophia's 17th birthday, she was gifted a brand-new car, gleaming in the driveway. Meanwhile, I was sternly instructed to be grateful for the hand-me-down clothes she no longer wanted. Her college tuition was paid in full without a second thought, whereas I was informed that if I harbored any academic ambitions, I would need to find my own way to finance them. Whenever I dared to question this blatant inequality, I was met with a well-rehearsed lecture about the importance of being a man and earning my own place in the world. My mother would perform this theatrical eye roll and sigh, "Lucas, you have always been far too sensitive. You can't expect the world to just hand you everything." My father, a man of fewer words but equal condescension, would just mutter about how I'd never amount to anything without their constant guidance. I will never forget one particular evening at dinner. My father leaned across the polished table, his eyes locking onto mine with an unnerving intensity, and said, "If you're still living under our roof on your 18th birthday, you will be a failure." I managed a hollow laugh, because what other response was there? But inside, the words crushed a part of me. When my 18th birthday did arrive, they didn't just ask me to leave. They orchestrated it like a public shaming. They sat me down in the living room, the same room where we celebrated holidays, and coldly informed me that all financial support was being severed. "It's time for you to learn the real value of hard work," my father declared. They offered no money, no help finding a place, not even a rudimentary safety net. I walked out of that front door with a single backpack containing 2 changes of clothes, heading toward a part-time fast food job that barely covered the cost of groceries. That first night, I slept curled up in the cramped backseat of my beat-up car. All the while, Sophia was gleefully posting pictures on Instagram from her sorority house, flashing a brilliant smile while holding up a sparkling new MacBook and a credit card freshly minted with her name, a gift from our father. The one person in my entire family who did not abandon me was my grandfather. He was my father's father, a man who seemed to be cut from an entirely different cloth than the rest of them. Where my parents saw weakness and defiance, he saw depth and potential. When others would tease me for my quiet nature, he would say, "That's because he thinks before he speaks, a rare quality." He couldn't care less that I wasn't the star athlete or the golden child. He saw me for exactly who I was. He would have me over on weekends, fill my stomach with a hot meal, and let me crash on his worn-in couch whenever life became too overwhelming. I never burdened him with the full, sordid scope of what my parents had done, but he was no fool. He saw the strain etched on my face. He noticed how I would flinch at the mere mention of my father's name. And over time, he seamlessly stepped into the role of a father, becoming more of a parent to me than my own biological one ever was. Fast forward nearly 10 years. I had carved out a modest, stable life for myself. It was nothing glamorous. I worked long, grueling hours at a logistics company, saved every penny I could, and maintained a carefully guarded distance from my family. Sophia would occasionally send me smug text messages, filled with pictures from her exotic travels or her new house, subtle reminders that in her eyes, I was still languishing beneath her. My parents remained entirely silent unless they needed something. Then, like clockwork, I would receive a saccharine call from my mother. "Lucas, honey, how have you been?" I was old enough and wise enough to know better than to fall for the act. I kept my responses polite but brief. I refused to be their emergency backup plan. Then came the phone call I had been simultaneously dreading and expecting. My grandfather had passed away. The news gutted me. Even though he had been ill for some time, a part of me was convinced he would pull through. Losing him felt like losing the only genuine family anchor I had ever known. When his lawyer called to inform me about the will reading, I assumed I might receive a cherished watch or perhaps a heartfelt letter, something sentimental. Never in my wildest dreams did I imagine I would be inheriting everything. The moment I walked into the oak-paneled law office, I froze in place. My parents and Sophia were already seated, dressed as if they were attending a high society gala. My mother's smile was a wide, predatory slash of red lipstick. My father's hand rested smugly on his knee, a picture of false confidence. And Sophia, she gave me a slow, deliberate once-over, as if she were mentally calculating my current net worth and finding it wanting. My first instinct was to turn and flee, but I forced myself to take a seat. The air was thick with my mother's phony sweetness. She leaned over, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. "Don't you worry, Lucas. We will make sure the estate is taken care of properly." My father chimed in. "Yes, of course. We'll manage it all for you." They had already begun to mentally spend the money. I could see it glinting in their eyes. They still saw me as the weak, malleable boy they had so easily kicked to the curb. But then the lawyer, a man named Mr. Caldwell, cleared his throat, shuffled the stack of documents before him, and spoke the words that made my heart pound against my ribs. Per the wishes of the late Mr. Walter Montgomery, his entire estate, valued at approximately $3.5 million, is hereby left to his grandson, Lucas Montgomery. I swear, for a moment, time itself stopped. I looked up, and in my mind's eye I could almost see my grandfather's knowing smirk, as if he had orchestrated this very moment from beyond. My parents' smiles were frozen on their faces, grotesque masks of shock. Sophia's jaw literally dropped. Then the lawyer turned the page and added, "There are, however, some additional stipulations you'll all want to hear." That was when things took a turn that none of us, especially not them, could have ever expected. My mother was the first to snap out of the collective shock, but her voice was an octave too high, her pleasantness strained, as if she were desperately trying to conceal a rising tide of panic. "Well, of course, that makes perfect sense," she chirped, clapping her hands together with a hollow sound. "Lucas was always so very close to Dad, but naturally Lucas will need our guidance. He's so inexperienced with finances. We'll have to step in, won't we, dear?" She shot a pointed look at my father, who nodded his assent as if the entire arrangement had already been decided in his favor. My father settled back in his chair, steepling his fingers in a gesture of paternal authority. "Yes, Walter meant well, I'm sure, but Lucas is simply not equipped to handle an estate of this magnitude. $3.5 million is a tremendous responsibility for someone with no financial background. It could ruin him. It's only logical that we manage the funds on his behalf." His words made my stomach clench into a tight knot. They didn't see me as a person deserving of this gift. They saw me as a temporary obstacle, standing between them and a fortune. Sophia let out a condescending little smirk, tucking a stray piece of hair behind her ear as if she were already picturing herself on a lavish shopping spree funded by my inheritance. "Honestly, Lucas, don't take this the wrong way, but you've never been, well, responsible. Remember that time you maxed out that tiny credit card in your freshman year?" She giggled under her breath, as if that single, long-ago mistake defined my entire character. And Dad's right. A sudden windfall like this could really mess you up. Just let us help. The lawyer cleared his throat again, his voice cutting cleanly through their self-serving performance. "If I may, Mr. Montgomery specified very clearly in the will that the estate belongs to Lucas alone. No trustees, no oversight, and full, unencumbered control." His eyes flickered toward me for a brief second, a subtle message that seemed to say, "Your grandfather knew exactly what they would try to do." This, however, did not deter my parents in the slightest. My mother placed a hand on my arm, her manicured nails digging slightly into my sleeve. "Lucas, sweetheart, you know we only want what's best for you. We can guide you through this. We can make sure you don't make any foolish mistakes. Think of it as a family effort. Grandpa would have wanted us all to benefit." That word, benefit, hung heavy in the air. Benefit for them, not for me. I remained silent, fighting to keep my expression neutral. But inside, a quiet rage was beginning to seethe. All those years of being told I wasn't good enough, of being passed over for Sophia, of sleeping in my car while they posted laughing vacation photos online. And now, they had the audacity to think they could just sweep in and take control of the one thing my grandfather had left specifically for me. It wasn't even about the money at that point. It was about their breathtaking hubris, their unshakable belief that I was incapable of managing my own life without their help. Sophia crossed her legs and leaned forward, her voice a soft, condescending purr. "Look, Lucas, you've done fine for yourself, I guess, but this is a different league. You don't want to end up like one of those lottery winners who go broke in a year, do you? I mean, think about it. You're not even a homeowner. You still rent, don't you? You don't have any experience with investments. What if you blow it all?" Her tone was laced with pity. "It just makes sense for Dad to handle it. He's been managing money his whole career." What she left unsaid, but what I heard loud and clear, was her deeply ingrained assumption that I would always be the failure, the one who lagged behind, the one they could easily control. This time, the lawyer didn't even look up from his papers. "Again, Mr. Montgomery's instructions are explicit. No one but Lucas is to control or manage the estate." My father's jaw tightened, though he tried to mask it with a strained smile. Of course. We're just concerned, that's all. You understand, son." He used the word son as if it were a term of endearment, but it sounded hollow and transactional. This was the same man who had warned me I'd never make it on my own, who had watched me pack my meager belongings on my 18th birthday without even offering me $20 for groceries. Now he wanted me to hand over millions as a thank you. My mother let out a small, tinkling laugh, tilting her head. "Lucas, you know, we always wanted the best for you. Maybe we were tough on you, but look how strong you've become. That was our way of preparing you. Don't hold grudges. Let's move forward as a family." I nearly choked on the hypocrisy. They prepared me by casting me out and letting me struggle while they showered Sophia with every advantage. My grandfather had prepared me, not them. He was the one who taught me resilience, patience, and the value of quiet strength. Still, I said nothing. I wanted to hear every last manipulative word. I wanted to let them dig their own graves. The lawyer proceeded to read through the rest of the terms, but I barely registered what he was saying. My parents were already whispering to each other, formulating plans. Sophia was tapping away on her phone under the table, likely texting her boyfriend about how rich she was about to become. I sat there, motionless, but inside I felt a seismic shift. After years of being the discarded one, after countless nights spent wondering if I had any worth at all, I suddenly held all the power. And they absolutely despised it. When the lawyer finished, my mother stood up quickly, smoothing her skirt. "Well, thank you, Mr. Caldwell. Lucas, we'll discuss the details at home. You'll come over for dinner tonight, won't you?" She said it as if it were a foregone conclusion, as if I would naturally fall right back into their orbit. My father added, "Yes, we'll get started on a plan right away. Investments, property management, taxes, don't you worry, we'll take care of everything." As we walked out, Sophia leaned in close, that same smug little smirk playing on her lips. "You're lucky, Lucas. If it weren't for us, you'd drown in all this. Don't forget who actually knows what they're doing." I clenched my teeth and balled my fists at my sides. Lucky? No, I wasn't lucky. I was chosen. My grandfather had seen through all of them and deliberately chose to place his trust, and his legacy, in my hands. They were no longer in charge, no matter how much they tried to pretend otherwise. But I didn't say anything. Not yet. I had a deep, sinking feeling that this was only the beginning. I left the law office that afternoon, my head spinning, clutching the copy of my grandfather's will like it was a sacred text. My parents walked out with the brittle smiles of people suppressing profound disappointment, but I could feel their eyes burning into my back as I walked away. I knew them well enough to understand this wasn't the end of their scheming. It was merely the opening act, and I was not wrong. That evening, around 9 o'clock, there was a sharp knock on my apartment door. When I opened it, Sophia stood there, dressed as if she had just stepped off a fashion runway, her expensive perfume filling my small hallway. She offered me that same practiced sneer and slipped past me without an invitation. "Cute place," she murmured, her eyebrows raised in disdain as she surveyed my modest living room. "But let's be honest, Lucas. This won't do anymore. You're going to need something much bigger. And you know who can help you with that? Us." I closed the door softly, already feeling a wave of exhaustion. "What do you want, Sophia?" She flopped down onto my couch and elegantly crossed one leg over the other. "It's simple. I'm here to make sure you don't completely embarrass yourself with this inheritance. You've been living small for so long, you don't even know what you've got. Think about it. Dad knows investments. Mom knows people. And she paused, twirling a strand of her perfectly highlighted hair around her finger. I know style. Imagine the three of us guiding you. We could turn Grandpa's estate into something even bigger, but only if you stop being so stubborn." Her words stung, not because there was any truth to them, but because they were a direct echo of every insult my parents had ever hurled at me. Small, stubborn, incompetent, she knew the family script by heart. "I don't need your help," I stated, my voice firm. "Grandpa left it to me. Not to you, not to them. To me." Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but she quickly recovered with a dismissive laugh. "Oh, Lucas, you can't really believe that. You think Grandpa didn't expect you to lean on your family for support. You wouldn't have even known to show up at that lawyer's office if Mom hadn't told you the time." That's when I understood her true purpose. She wasn't there to offer help. She was there to test my resolve to see if I could be bent. But the true, unforgivable betrayal came a week later. I received a call from Mr. Caldwell, the lawyer. His tone was clipped and professional. "Lucas, I need to ask you, did you authorize any changes or inquiries related to the estate account?" My stomach plummeted. "No. Why? What's happened?" "There have been several attempts to access the funds. Someone presented themselves at the bank, claiming to be your representative. Luckily, the bank flagged it because of the strict stipulations in the will, but they were apparently very insistent, claiming you had given them verbal authorization." I knew instantly who it was. My parents. That night I drove by their house. It looked exactly as I remembered it. 2 cars in the driveway, the porch light casting a warm, inviting glow, the very picture of suburban bliss. I sat there in the darkness, my hands gripping the steering wheel, just staring at the home from which I had been so callously exiled. And for the first time, I felt neither sadness nor longing. I felt a cold, calculated anger, because this wasn't just manipulation anymore. This was attempted theft. They were willing to break the law, to impersonate me, to lie and cheat in order to take what my grandfather had entrusted to me. As if the universe wanted to twist the knife a little deeper, Sophia texted me later that night. "Don't be naive, Lucas. Money belongs in the hands of people who know how to use it. Be smart about this, or you're going to lose everything." I stared at the message for a long time, the words glowing in the dark, my heart pounding in my chest. That was the moment something inside me snapped. The betrayal wasn't just about the attempt to steal from me. It was the stark realization that they would forever see me as the weak link, the disposable one. They had cut me off at 18, laughing as I struggled to make ends meet. And now that I finally had something of my own, they wanted that too. I put my phone down and sat in the quiet darkness, thinking about my grandfather. I remembered his voice, calm and steady. The way he used to look at me and say, "Don't ever let anyone else tell you what you're worth, son. You decide that." For years, I hadn't truly believed him. But now, with my family circling me like sharks, I finally understood. That night was my tipping point. I was no longer going to let them control me, and I wasn't just going to protect what was mine. I was going to make them regret the day they ever underestimated me. But I had no idea just how far they would be willing to go next, or how vicious the coming fight was about to become. The days that followed the incident at the bank were some of the loneliest I had endured since the night I was kicked out at 18. At first, I thought I could just ignore my parents' schemes, cut them off completely, and get on with my life. But that wasn't their style. They had a way of worming into every crack, of forcing themselves into spaces where they didn't belong until you felt completely suffocated. I began noticing strange, unsettling things. One morning, I walked down to my car to find a deep, angry scratch gouged along the entire passenger side. It wasn't random. It was deliberate and jagged, as if someone had dragged a key with malicious intent from the front bumper all the way to the tail light. Later that week, I received a formal email from my landlord informing me that they had received multiple anonymous complaints about excessive noise coming from my apartment. I lived alone. I rarely played music, and I worked late most nights. Someone was clearly and systematically trying to make my life difficult. Then came the whispers. My parents still lived in the same town where I grew up, and they commanded a small but influential social circle. The country club set, the church crowd, the gossipy neighbors. When I was out running errands, I began to notice people looking at me differently. The cashier at the grocery store, who used to be friendly, now raised her eyebrows as I paid for my food. The woman at the gas station muttered just loud enough for me to hear, "Must be nice, living off an old man's money." I knew exactly where it was coming from. My parents had launched a smear campaign, painting me as the greedy, undeserving grandson who had swooped in and stolen the family fortune. The worst part wasn't even the slander. It was the growing silence. The few friends I had in town stopped calling. They had heard the rumors too, and maybe, just maybe, a part of them believed it. I had worked so hard to build a reputation for myself as someone dependable and hardworking. And now, my own parents were systematically destroying it. I hit a new low one night, sitting alone at my kitchen table, staring at the small pile of bills in front of me. Not because I couldn't pay them. I had the money now, but because I was afraid. I was afraid that if I used my grandfather's money too freely, it would just feed the narrative my parents were creating. I was terrified that every move I made would be used as proof that I was incapable of handling what had been given to me. That's when the old, familiar doubts began to creep back in. Maybe they were right. Maybe I wasn't strong enough. Maybe I would drown in this fortune just as they predicted. For hours, I sat there, replaying every insult, every dismissal, every memory of being told I was worthless. It felt like I was 18 again, sleeping in the back of my car, wondering if I would make it through another week. But then, I opened a drawer in the table and found something I had almost forgotten about. It was an old envelope my grandfather had given me on my 21st birthday. I had kept it all these years but hadn't looked at it again. Inside was a note, written in his strong, slightly shaky handwriting. "Lucas, if you're reading this, I hope you've learned by now that the world doesn't give you anything. It tries to take. Don't you let it. You are stronger than you know, and one day you're going to have to prove it. When that day comes, don't back down. Stand tall. They can only take from you what you're willing to give them." I read it over and over again until the words were burned into my memory. My grandfather had known. He had seen my parents for who they were long before I could, and he had believed in my ability to stand up to them. That night, something shifted inside me. I was still at rock bottom, lonely, beaten down, and overwhelmed. But I began to plan, quietly and methodically. I started documenting everything. I kept copies of the bank's report about the attempted access to my account. I saved Sophia's condescending text messages. I wrote down every rumor I heard around town and who I heard it from. I started staying late at work, using the company's public computers to research estate law, trust funds, and property management. If they wanted to treat me like I was incompetent, I would make damn sure I was the most competent person in the room. I told no one what I was doing. I smiled when people sneered. I stayed calm when my parents made their little passive-aggressive jabs. I let them think I was backing down. All the while, I was silently building a fortress beneath the surface. It was lonely, painstaking work. Every day felt like walking a tightrope over a bottomless pit, but there was a strange power in my silence. For the first time, I wasn't reacting. I was preparing. And I had a powerful feeling that my grandfather would have been proud. I didn't know when or how, but I made myself a promise. One day, the scales would tip. One day, I would stop being the target and start being the one holding the strings. I just had no idea how soon that day would come, or how violently my parents would try to force my hand. The shift didn't happen overnight, but once it started, it felt like an unstoppable force, a tide finally turning in my favor after years of being pulled under. I kept my head down, worked long hours, and poured my energy into learning everything I could about responsible financial management. It was never just about the money itself. It was about proving to myself, once and for all, that I was not the helpless kid my parents had always made me out to be. The first major turning point came when I hired a financial advisor. He wasn't someone flashy or connected to my parents' social circle, but a quiet, methodical man named Richard, recommended by a coworker. He wasn't impressed by the size of the estate, and he didn't treat me like a child. He sat across from me with a yellow legal pad, asked intelligent questions, and listened to my answers without judgment. By the end of our first meeting, he had laid out a clear, sensible plan: diversified investments, tax shelters, and long-term security. "You're more than capable," he told me as we shook hands. "You just needed someone to confirm it." Those words lit a fire in me. For the first time, I felt I wasn't just defensively holding onto my grandfather's gift. I was actively building upon it. I used a portion of the estate to buy a small house in a quieter part of town. It was nothing extravagant, nothing my parents could mock as ostentatious. But it was mine. Walking through the empty rooms that first night, I stood in the middle of the living room and just let the silence wash over me. No one could kick me out of here. No one could tell me I didn't belong. The weight of the keys in my pocket felt like proof that I had finally built something real for myself. At work, things began to change too. I had always been just another cog in the machine, but with my grandfather's letter echoing in my mind, I started pushing myself harder. I volunteered for difficult projects, stayed late, and delivered more than was asked of me. Slowly, people started to notice. A small but significant promotion came my way. My manager told me, "You've got leadership potential in you, Lucas. You just need to believe it yourself." I didn't announce any of this. I knew better than to give my parents any information about how well things were going. But eventually, word got around. Small-town gossip had a way of boomeranging, and soon I started hearing whispers that fueled me even more. He bought a house. He got a new job title. Maybe old Walter knew what he was doing after all. My parents' narrative was beginning to crumble, replaced by something else, respect, however grudging. That respect worried my parents more than anything. One evening, Sophia made an unannounced visit to my new house. I didn't let her past the front porch. She stood there in her designer heels, arms crossed, her expression a mixture of bewilderment and annoyance. "Nice place," she said flatly. "Did you decorate it yourself, or did you finally hire someone to hold your hand?" I didn't take the bait. I just leaned against the doorframe and said, "I'm doing fine, Sophia." "Better than fine, it looks like." Her eyes narrowed. "Don't get cocky, Lucas. You think one house and a little job promotion mean you've won. Dad's already looking into ways, too." She stopped herself, biting her lip, but I caught it. Dad is already looking into ways to what? Regain control. Undermine me. It didn't matter. I knew then that they hadn't given up. And that's when I realized that my ascent was more than just survival. It was about positioning. Every step forward I took was another piece of leverage. Every success was a weapon they couldn't take from me. I started connecting with people outside my family's toxic orbit. I joined the board of a local charity in my grandfather's name, honoring the quiet philanthropic work he had done for years. I found myself in rooms with people who respected my grandfather for his integrity and generosity. With every handshake and connection, I was building a support network for myself that my parents couldn't penetrate with rumors alone. Inwardly, I was still guarded, still carrying the scars of those early years. But for the first time, I felt a quiet confidence taking root. My parents had expected me to flounder, to drown in the responsibility. Instead, I was learning to swim in waters far deeper than they had ever imagined. Still, I kept my preparations quiet. I knew the storm wasn't over. If anything, it was just gathering strength. And when it finally broke, I wanted to be ready. I could feel it coming. My parents weren't the type to accept defeat quietly. They had tried manipulation. They had tried theft. They had tried slander. None of it had worked. I knew their next move would be bigger, more desperate. And when it came, I had to be ready not just to defend myself, but to strike back. The setup came almost by accident, though in hindsight, it felt like my grandfather was still guiding me, even years after his passing. I had started attending more of those charity board meetings I joined in his honor. At one of these events, I met a man named Marcus Hale. He was in his late 50s, a retired attorney with sharp, intelligent eyes and a calm demeanor that made you lean in when he spoke. He had known my grandfather personally. Apparently, they had played chess together every Thursday night for nearly a decade. When he learned who I was, his expression softened. "Walter was a rare breed," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "I hope you know how proud he was of you." There was something in the way he said it that felt different, almost coded. Later that week, over coffee, he leaned across the table and said quietly, "You need to be careful. Your grandfather, he anticipated there might be trouble after he was gone. He put certain protections in place." I froze, my coffee cup halfway to my lips. "Protections? What kind of protections?" Marcus allowed himself a small, wry smile. "That's something we can discuss more formally, but let's just say Walter wasn't blind to your parents' nature. He made sure the estate was insulated in ways they wouldn't expect. If they overstep, it won't just be morally wrong. It will be legally disastrous for them." For the first time, I felt like I wasn't just playing defense. I had ammunition. Marcus spent the next 2 weeks helping me understand exactly what my grandfather had done. The estate wasn't just a lump sum of money. It was a brilliantly structured portfolio. There were deeds, shares in a small collection of commercial properties, and even a trust set up specifically for charitable endeavors in my name. More importantly, there were clauses, ironclad stipulations that explicitly disinherited my parents if they ever attempted to interfere or represent themselves as agents of the estate. My grandfather had put it all in writing, signed and notarized, as if he knew they would try to take what wasn't theirs. As Marcus laid it all out, piece by piece, I felt something fundamental shift inside me. All those years I had thought I was alone, powerless, fighting to survive. It turned out my grandfather had been planning for this very fight all along. He had seen the storm coming, and he had given me not just the resources to weather it, but the weapons to fight back. My parents' confidence, meanwhile, only grew. I started getting letters in the mail, formal-looking envelopes with their names neatly typed at the bottom. Proposals for how I should divide the inheritance. One suggested putting Sophia on a family liaison payroll. Another suggested selling off the estate's properties to simplify management and funneling the proceeds into trusted family accounts. I didn't respond to a single one, but I kept every letter, neatly filed away in a folder Marcus had told me to keep. "Paper trails are powerful," he'd said. "Every word they put in writing is another foot of rope around their own necks." At the same time, I was ascending in my own right. Work recognized me again, this time with a major promotion that came with real authority and a seat at the table during strategy meetings. People who had once overlooked me were now seeking my opinion and nodding when I spoke. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about respect, real respect, earned through diligence and competence. And with respect came allies. The more people saw me coming into my own, the more they quietly pushed back against the rumors my parents had spread. At community events, I started overhearing things like, "Lucas has really turned out to be a fine young man, and you can tell Walter raised him right." Every comment was another chip in the facade my parents had tried to build. The best part was, they had no idea. They had no idea that while they were plotting behind closed doors, I was gathering allies, documentation, and quiet power. They still saw me as the boy they had sent packing with nothing but a backpack. They were expecting me to fold, to hand over the reins, and to thank them for the privilege. But I wasn't that boy anymore. I was a man with a plan, and they were completely unprepared for the power that was coming their way. Then came the moment that tied it all together. One evening, Marcus handed me a small, worn-edged, leather-bound notebook. "Your grandfather asked me to hold onto this for you," he told me. "Until I felt you were ready." Inside were pages and pages of my grandfather's handwriting, notes, observations, and a precise, step-by-step guide on how to counter every move he predicted my parents would make. He hadn't just left me an inheritance, he had left me a playbook. As I closed the journal, my hands trembling slightly, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. The time for just surviving was over. I wasn't just going to defend what was mine. I was going to set the stage so that when my parents made their next move, I would be ready to utterly dismantle it. They wanted to play games. They had no idea I was already holding the winning hand. The breaking point arrived sooner than I had expected. My parents had been circling for months, sending letters, dropping hints to neighbors, making not-so-subtle comments whenever our paths crossed in town. But when they finally made their move, they went big, far too big. Marcus called me on a crisp autumn morning. His voice was calm, but it held an edge of steel I hadn't heard before. "Lucas, your parents filed a petition with the court this morning. They're claiming you're mentally unfit to manage the estate and are requesting legal guardianship over the assets." Guardianship. They were literally trying to have me declared incompetent at 27 years old, after everything I had built for myself. I almost laughed when he told me. The sheer audacity of it was so staggering. But then the reality hit me. This wasn't just another backroom attempt at manipulation. This was public. This was them dragging my name through the mud, trying to paint me as inadequate in front of the entire community. And it was the biggest mistake they could have possibly made. For months, Marcus and I had been preparing. We had quietly gathered every shred of evidence of their interference. The report on the attempted bank access, the manipulative letters, Sophia's text messages, the carefully drafted clauses in the will my grandfather had so presciently included. Piece by piece, we had built an airtight case that practically gleamed. The court date was set for a gray Tuesday morning. I walked into that courtroom wearing a simple suit, with no entourage and no theatrics. My parents were already there, flanking Sophia like two protective sentinels. They looked confident, smug even, as if the outcome were a foregone conclusion. My mother even had the nerve to give me a small, pitying smile, her expression syrupy sweet, as if she were forgiving me in advance for causing this whole spectacle. But as the judge called us to order, and my parents' lawyer began his opening statement, the cracks in their plan immediately began to show. He painted a picture of me as irresponsible, emotionally unstable, and prone to financial recklessness. He brought up my lack of experience, my modest upbringing. Sophia nodded dramatically at every point, playing her part to perfection. And then it was our turn. Marcus rose slowly, commanding the room's attention without ever raising his voice. "Your Honor, what we have here is not a case of incompetence. It is a case of greed." He began to lay out the evidence, one document at a time. The fraudulent attempt at the bank, the letters proposing I relinquish control, the text messages dripping with condescension, the clauses in the will that explicitly disinherited my parents if they tried to interfere. With each piece of evidence, the courtroom grew quieter. My parents began to shift uncomfortably in their seats, their smugness melting away. Sophia's jaw tightened, her arms crossing defensively over her chest. Then came the final, devastating blow. Marcus held up the leather-bound notebook my grandfather had left for me. Mr. Montgomery anticipated this very scenario. In his own handwriting, he detailed his concerns about his son and daughter-in-law's history of manipulation. He wrote, and I quote, "If they attempt to take what is not theirs, it will be all the proof needed as to why I chose Lucas." The words hung in the courtroom air like the strike of a gavel. My mother's face went white. My father's hands clenched into tight fists. Sophia stared at the floor, refusing to look at anyone. When the judge finally spoke, her voice was firm and unequivocal. "The petition is denied. The estate will remain in the sole control of Lucas Montgomery. Furthermore, this court cautions the petitioners against any further attempts to undermine the explicit wishes of the deceased. This matter is closed." It was over in less than an hour, but the fallout was immediate. My parents' power play had not only failed spectacularly, but it had exposed them for exactly what they were: deceptive, selfish, and desperate. As we were leaving the courthouse, my mother made one last pathetic attempt. She reached out to me, her voice trembling with manufactured warmth. Luca's, sweetheart, we only did this because we were worried about you. You don't understand the kind of pressure this is. Let us. I stopped and looked at her, feeling a sense of calm I hadn't known in my entire life. No, I said simply. You did this for yourselves. Grandpa knew it, and now everyone else does too. Her hand froze midair and then dropped limply to her side. My father muttered something under his breath but couldn't meet my eyes. Sophia just pushed past both of them, her heels clicking like angry bullets on the marble floor. I walked out of that courthouse feeling the weight of years lift from my shoulders. I hadn't just defended my grandfather's trust. I had done it with a quiet confidence they never thought I possessed. They had made a career out of underestimating me, and their arrogance had finally, irrevocably, caught up with them. But that was just the beginning of their reckoning. Because while the courtroom had settled the legal battle, the real fallout, the social, the personal, the irreversible, was still waiting just around the corner. The weeks that followed the court hearing were like watching a line of dominoes topple, one after another, in excruciating slow motion. My parents had walked into that courtroom expecting an easy victory, believing they could bend the world to their will just as they had once bent me as a child. But the judge's ruling did more than just deny their petition. It shattered the meticulously crafted illusion they had maintained for decades. Once the mask was ripped away, the entire community began to see them in a new, harsh light. It started with small things. My mother's circle of friends at the country club, the women she had spent years cultivating, began to pull away. Conversations would halt when she entered a room, whereas before she had always been the center of attention. One of the women even approached me quietly at the grocery store and said, "We had no idea they treated you so poorly, Lucas. I'm so sorry." My mother tried to keep up appearances, but the strained smiles and hushed whispers told the real story. Her social currency was bankrupt. My father fared no better. Word of the hearing had spread through his company. Small towns have a way of ensuring no secret stays buried for long. His reputation as a shrewd financial mind suddenly seemed less credible. Clients grew wary, meetings were canceled, and a persistent rumor began to circulate that he had been encouraged to take an early retirement. For a man whose entire identity was built on his career, the humiliation was a slow, corrosive poison. Sophia's downfall was perhaps the steepest of all. She had built her social standing on being the golden child, the flawless daughter who received every gift while taunting me. But after the hearing, people looked at her differently. At parties, she was no longer the belle of the ball. She was the girl who tried and failed to steal from her own brother. Her fiancé broke up with her not long after, and I heard through the grapevine that she had moved back in with my parents. The three of them were now trapped under the same roof, feeding on one another's bitterness. Meanwhile, my own life was expanding in ways I had never imagined. The estate was more than money, it was opportunity. I invested in myself and in projects my grandfather would have been proud of. The nonprofit board I joined grew, and I found myself taking on leadership roles where my voice was heard and valued. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the outsider. I wasn't the disappointment. People respected me. But the most profound moment came one evening when I found myself driving by my parents' house. The same house I was thrown out of at 18 with nothing but a backpack. The porch light was on, but the yard was looking weedy, and the paint on the shutters was starting to peel. The whole house seemed tired, worn down, a reflection of the people inside. I parked across the street for a few moments and just watched. Memories washed over me. The night of my eviction, the years of ridicule, the constant, painful comparisons to Sophia. For so long, that house had been a monument to my failure, my shame. But now, as I looked at it, all I felt was a profound sense of clarity. They hadn't broken me. They had forged me. Every insult, every dismissal, every bitter word had been a hammer blow that shaped the resolve I now possessed. And in that moment, I realized my revenge was complete, not because I had humiliated them in court, not because they had lost their social standing. It was because I no longer needed their approval. Their power over me was gone, completely and utterly. I rolled down my window, letting the cool night air wash over me, and said the words to myself that I had never dared to believe before. Grandpa was right. I decide what I'm worth. With that thought, I put the car in gear and drove away, leaving the house, and everything it represented, in my rearview mirror for good. They had once tried to cut me out of their lives. In the end, I was the one who cut them out of mine.